Awesome. Great. Thanks so much, guys. Really looking forward to the discussion. And so, like I said, really want to start just from the beginning and want to understand, what the shift in the medtech space has been in the last 20 years, specifically on each of the things that you've experienced in your expertise and your different roles within your respective businesses. So, Bill, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned in your intro, Stephanie, a lot has changed in medtech over the last 20 years, and we could point to a whole lot of trends that would prove that to be true. None more than the one you already cited, that in 2002, 22% of MDs were hospital employed. The remaining 78% were in private practice. Today, 20 years later, that has entirely flipped, where 80% of MDs now work for a hospital. So certainly that is a trend that has changed the decision making within the hospitals that medtech sales reps are calling. The hospitals themselves have also changed, where if you think back 20 years ago, there were a lot of different community hospital options in each of your geographies that have been accumulated or merged into a larger hospital system or IDN, where today, in any particular geography, there's not a limitless number of healthcare providers. There are usually a couple of very large IDNs that each operate a number of different hospitals, giving them more buying power. And it's changed the decision-making process inside of medtech. And I guess, a big part of the conversation today, I'm hoping, is how do we look at some of what has allowed medtech sales teams to be effective and successful in the past? How does that need to change based on what we're seeing currently? And as we look forward, in which direction is it going? And what are we going to need more of to prepare our people to compete in that environment?
That's interesting, Phil. I was just looking over a Bain Consulting survey and study, part of our research here at Salesforce. And over the last 2 years, centralized procurement decisions have increased twofold in the last 2 years. So not only are physicians being employed by these hospitals, health systems, IDNs, the decision making is being centralized in procurement 2x over the last 2 years. If you ask, in a survey with physicians and clinicians directly, 60% of them will say that they're going to direct vendors over to procurement. And what procurement is looking for from vendors, all the same things, right? We need the clinical education, we need face time with the clinicians, but at the end of the day, procurement is looking for not a vendor, but a partnership, right? They need constant communication. They need to know changes to contract, changes to pricing, changes to supplies, right? So to your point, it's less and less of a clinical decision, right? Less and less of, folks being in the field with the doctors. But there needs to be sort of that engagement and that level of transparency and almost, account selling up to these larger organizations, because we need to have that relationship. They need to have that relationship with procurement, but also decision makers up in the C-suite.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Mike. I think we're living in a strange time right now. Every single industry is right now with COVID. And from what I heard you just say, ties back to what the reps are experiencing at an in-home environment right now, but it's also tied to the data that's at their disposal and the visibility they have around other conversations that other reps are having within an IDN. So at home work, we don't know where it's going. We know that the landscape has changed, but I think tying the more strategic sale and the more enterprise and corporate account type of sale ties into the technology that organizations are investing in. I think CRM, Mike, from your perspective, I'm sure you're seeing it at Salesforce. It's now a necessity. It's not a nice to have or something that is just at the rep's disposal. It's something that's there so people can strategically think about who has relationships with who. It's serving as the collaboration platform around what deals are taking place and what the broader strategic initiative is at these major IDNs that they're selling into. So I think the shift that Phil brought up, as well as Mike's point around we need to do more enterprise selling and focused on procurement and the strategic sale, really ties back into how organizations are investing into their people through sales enablement and making CRM more of a necessity with the data that they have to help guide their sellers on what good looks like and where the potential is across these accounts, and ultimately getting people to collaborate more.
Yeah, it's sort of an easy landing spot as we try to think about back to, what made us successful in the past, what's going to make us successful today and in the future. All of that said, I don't want to discount the clinical stakeholder.
Yeah.
Every one of these companies, as part of their mission vision, has patient somewhere in their statement, and it is about improving healthcare, making healthcare better. And in order to get, at least it's been our experience, that in order to get an audience in the C-suite or otherwise, you tend to need to have a clinical champion. And so we're not talking, in this case, it's not a throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't think the successful device rep of the future, it's not like you're either clinical or you're administrative economic in your ability to appeal, but it's a both, where you need to be clinical, you need to be credible down in the OR or in a physician's office, but you also need to be able to navigate a complex institution in order to get technologies that physicians want to incorporate into their care pathways into these hospitals and IDNs. So historically, if a surgeon said yes, and they had the majority of the decision-making influence, that was the end of your sale. It was a very transactional deal. Where today, what we hear, it's very easy even to brush off a sales rep and say, well, if you can get it approved at the hospital, I'll use it. Where it's almost knowing that that's going to be a dead end for most sales reps, a way to get them out of their office.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, we can't discount that. The engagement with the clinicians, it isn't going away. You need those clinical champions. But what is surprising in what we're seeing is, and there's an opportunity here when we talk about the way buying decisions are being made at the IDN level, there's an opportunity here because surprisingly, some of the largest medtech organizations in the world, they still do not know where their own people are within a hospital, right? They could go to a case and be supporting the physician, right? Be on a sales call and have no real idea that another rep in another division within the same company is in the same operating room, right? Servicing the same case for a different product, right? So as we start to think about this concept of account teams, right, or building an account plan around generating more of an enterprise agreement and enterprise relationship with procurement, with the chief financial officer's office within these larger organizations, there's also that opportunity to just drive better sales behavior, better collaboration. CRM is a term that's been around for a long time. It's a technology that's been around for 25, 30 years. Salesforce is 21 years old at this point. But we're sort of seeing the shift where these tools are, they're more systems of engagement because we need to be able to support the operational mechanisms of the medtech organization, but provide more visibility into how you're engaging with all of the influencers and how the team, right, the account team, the other reps within other product areas within the organization are also engaging with the hospital to create a synchronized and organized approach that drive to the ultimate outcome, which is that enterprise agreement or relationship that you're trying to have with the customer.
Yeah, that's the concept of team selling 15 years ago in medtech. It wasn't necessarily there. I think what I'm seeing in the conversations our team is having with sales leadership, individual contributors, sales operations is that we need to get out of the concept of you own your book of business, you have all of your data at the individual level, compared to the shift of with the idea of getting those larger enterprise agreements in place of you need to put those into CRM. It needs to be company owned data that you're working at the individual level. And the benefit that that's going to have for you is larger deals, quicker deal cycles, uncovering additional opportunities, because once you get that data into CRM or into your strategic account plan and you're actually collaborating, things really, really happen. And so at the individual level, you need to do a better job at the company level of enabling them of what good looks like, and investing in the technology to help those individuals and that team selling. And at the company level, it makes a lot of sense, because we all know that medtech salespeople are typically going to go from organization to organization and want to take that book of business with them. But it makes a lot of sense to bring the account plan into the company level, the CRM level, so you own that data. So if there is attrition at an organization, the next person can step in and say, here's our strategy, here's who we're aligned with and have a great relationship with, here's where the potential is within this account, and I know the team that's supporting me and what they're working on a regular basis. So I think the concept you bring up around team selling, Mike, is really, really relevant and impacts the individual as well as the company in two different ways.
Yeah. And, that's almost another topic, because I wanted to segue there and get your all's thoughts on it, because we talk about the rep having, data in their head around their customers, adopting technology to support the business plan, to support the account plan. Because of the pandemic for the last, I guess, more than 18 months at this point, there's obviously been the shift from in-person engagement, in-person selling, to whether it's hybrid or completely virtual selling. The traditional, or, beyond 18 months ago, reps knew where they needed to be. They knew their relationships. They knew the next visit. They had their driving directions in the back of their head. They knew which hallway they were going to walk down. It was big on relationships, big on that face-to-face. But when they're not able to do that, there had to be this very fast pivot to virtual engagement. And that's where we're seeing this opportunity of, I called it forced adoption before, because if you're not face-to-face, if you don't have your business cards, your driver's license, and you're walking down the hallways, you're going to have a different way of engaging. And that's where data becomes valuable, right? You can be more productive, and you can actually start to leverage data to figure out, who are you going to have your next sales call with? Because that meeting is going to happen now in front of your computer over Zoom anyway. So what other data can the rep leverage to find the next best meeting, to discuss the next best topic, to collaborate with or find the other account team member and what they're working on within the same account, right? So now that there's less field-based activities, more time in front of a screen, right? But more time in front of a screen is going to equal more access to enterprise technology. So it's an opportunity that we're seeing and talking to our customers, an incredible opportunity to sort of reinvent or reimagine how they're delivering enterprise solutions to their end users to empower them, because they have to use something. So how do we make it easier? How do we make the data richer to improve decision-making? And how do we turn what would have been a day of 3 sales calls into a day of 8 highly effective, highly targeted sales calls? Because we now have the tools, and in a way we sort of have that forced adoption, because where else are the reps going to go?
Yeah, I think these are all really great points. I mean, when I think of it being in selling in the medtech space too, it's such that old environment. So I guess I'm kind of curious from your guys' perspective, right? You touched on how technology is important in this team collaboration, but how can you help with the adoption around making sure that you get the appropriate data and making sure that those reps live in these tools from a day-to-day basis so they can be most effective versus have it all live in their head?
Yeah, you're talking about a real value shift there, a real culture shift from some of the more tenured reps who have all of this data in their head, have a lot of clinical support in their network, in their accounts. Didn't need to do this sort of thing historically to be successful. Now, I think over the last decade, while some of these other trends have played out, they're starting to see a necessity to do that. Whereas if we went back a little bit in time, things like CRM were viewed very much like Big Brother and an added step to their work week, where to them, it's like, I already know these things. Why do I have to add on to my day to input them into the CRM, so that now there's value to the organization in the way of their own planning or their ability to train my replacement? So where things like CRM were viewed more as a threat. Now, we've seen enough examples. I've got a good friend that works for one of the larger medtech companies out there, that had been very successful, literally $10 million territory, with a few clinical techs, sales associates working underneath him, covering cases, et cetera, and a ton of clinical support down in the OR. That contract went out to bid, and it was a negotiation that they walked into with a fair amount of false confidence, thinking we have all of the support clinically down in the OR, only to learn as a result of the outcome of that bid, that $10 million went to zero overnight, despite the support they had down in the OR. So you start to see a need to appeal to these other stakeholders as these contracts play out, making the business, a lot less transactional today and a lot more contractual, institutional, enterprise type of sale.
Yeah. Stephanie, to your question, the way we like to look at things from an adoption standpoint is every decision from a capability standpoint that is made, for every unit of effort that you put into using a system, there needs to be at least 2 units of value of output, right? So making those decisions, because Phil, to your point, it's always been what are you going to watch me do today? You're tracking, how many activities do I need to hit? Make it less of a requirement. There is a requirement, right? Usage of a platform, tracking a pipeline of forecast metrics, visits is important, right? But how do we track those data points, but then deliver value back to the end user? And I'll give you an example of one of the most common trends that we're seeing. It's around data, right? All these organizations, every company has so much data. But how can we actually leverage data to influence behavior in mass? And what I mean by that is, influence decision-making or make decision-making easier for a field of whether it's 10 sales reps or 5,000 sales reps, by leveraging past performance and the inputs and the overall data that you're just naturally going to have within a CRM or any enterprise platform, trying to predict probable outcomes and the things that need to happen in order to influence the most optimal outcome. So we're getting sort of into like this whole machine learning, artificial intelligence, but that's the current reality, because there is so much data. We're able to leverage that to make essentially a recommendation on the next thing that a rep should do that could result in the optimum outcome, right? And if you can do that with data, if you could do that with a system, if you could do that with a system or a technology that people are actually adopting and using, you have the ability to influence behavior at scale towards the broader goal of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. My head immediately goes to, when you say data, Mike, is the high tech industry. Obviously, the high tech industry over the past 20 years, 5-10 years specifically, is absolutely going crazy. And I think it's because of the innovative technologies that are coming to the marketplace. AI is playing a bigger part, but I also have a strong feeling that technology companies are leveraging data to its utmost potential. Technology companies are the ones that are first movers when it comes to creating more visibility and more collaboration across key accounts that they're selling into and penetrating. My gut tells me that the big opportunity for medtech in the current state of the world is that the first movers when it comes to leveraging data to help create that visibility and collaboration across their key accounts and their account teams is one, but also investing in things like, let's embed our selling methodology into our CRM. Let's give the rep, to your point, Mike, from an output perspective, the next best action. What are the two next best actions that they should take across data points they should be collecting? Who should they be getting aligned with? Are we proactively telling a rep that, hey, we don't have a strong procurement relationship here, or we're fairly single-threaded in this hospital within a larger IDN? Or, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Rep, here's where the potential is with your key accounts. Here's where the white space is. I read a stat earlier that medical device patents have tripled over the past 5 years. So I mentioned earlier that the high tech space is innovative. The med tech space is one of the most innovative spaces out there. Now it's about how can you innovate your internal processes to align with the outputs that you guys are putting into the world to create better patient outcomes and innovative care. how do you do that with your selling team so they can take the awesome product work that you guys are doing and proactively tell them where they should be spending their time? So tying those two things together, I think, is going to be crucial for the success of the rep moving forward, and candidly, the success of companies moving forward. Invest in your people and invest in your processes.
Yeah,
And speed
awesome
up the
point.
onboarding time. Sorry, Phil, just, to add to that, Eddie, the onboarding time with the amount of patents that you mentioned, more products, more complexity, harder to sell, more to learn. You're onboarding in a remote
More time
environment,
and productivity
on Zoom, right? So imagine if you can answer almost all new hire questions with it's in your app, it's in your CRM, or it's in the one system that you're using to run your business. So that's a great point. Sorry, Phil.
No, I was just, really going to compliment both of those points. Mike, to your point, people do what they value. And I love you're saying for every unit of output, for every 1 unit of input that you're going to ask for, you got to give them two units of output. That's been our experience, regardless of adoption. We're in the training and development business, so we have adoption implementation questions on our end as well. It's easy to go to a training event and nod your head, yes, and then just go back and do what you always did after. So it's like, how do you get people to adopt it? How do you get them to recognize the value of it in the way of implementation? And Eddie, to your point, you start talking about alignment and modelability, where these sales are complex. I can't tell you how many managers or reps I've sat down with where we're trying to make training as relevant and real world as possible. So come with live active territory targets and people on your teams. So we're speaking, as relevant and germane as we can. And I can't tell you how long it takes them to set a scenario where it's always unique. Well, you got to understand, in my territory, it's a little different because it looks like this. When you get down to it, there's a process, and there are certain activities that an organization is going to conduct to predictably drive revenue, and there are recommended times to execute each of them. It's a much more modelable process than is in most places and on most sales teams today. And I also think, the whole onboarding and getting people up to speed. It also speaks to, we're asking a more tenured sales professional to step out of their comfort zone with the clinical stakeholder and into somewhere where they're uncomfortable, an economic stakeholder, an administrator within the hospital or IDN. Recommendations make a ton of sense there as well, as does training. This is a different conversation. And again, all of that a company tends to know within a relatively short period of time what the things are that are going to generate revenue to their organization and could prescribe those easier than they do. As well as, we haven't really started talking about content management yet, but not only recommended activities, but recommended content. Here's marketing collateral, here's data and literature that's going to support our point and speak to the priorities of these different stakeholders where we're not as comfortable making a sales call today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And when I know it was touched on earlier too, team collaboration, right? So you have new folks that are getting onboarded and how it can't just rely on that one person, right? When they were going just to the doctors, now the administration team. I'd love to hear a little bit about how this has become much more of a team selling sport and some of those strategies around that for within the medtech space.
I think from my perspective, the example I gave earlier, where there's even just sales reps within different departments that don't know that sales rep A is in the same operating room as sales rep B, right? So just having a single platform, right? And the way we're kind of seeing this and the trend that it's going is a lot of medtech companies have been using traditional CRM for a long time, right? But the definition of CRM is starting to change to, a commercial operating platform, because, you have the front office activities of sales, marketing, and to some degree customer service, right? And field service. But then you have the middle office activities around, billing, around revenue recognition, around quoting, around rebate management. And those things are becoming digitized, right? Those are things that are starting to blend into the traditional CRM, because at the end of the day, it's supporting the customer lifecycle. And then of course there's the back office, which is always going to be there, the financials and the supply chain, and having that streamlined integration. So from a teaming standpoint, more and more teams are getting brought into the fold of the account plan if more and more of not just the selling activities, but all commercial activities are taking place within a single digital place, right? And Phil, to your last point around content and really everything with this shift to virtual and hybrid engagement for the sales forces, the key word is digital, right? We're changing from in-person buying experiences to digital buying experiences. The printed out white papers that were in the trunk of a sales rep's car aren't effective if you're putting it up on a Zoom screen, right? So changing that digitally. And then if you do that, like what kind of benefits do you get by being able to track what was viewed, email it right away, interact on the fly with some of these assets? So there's a digital buying experience, there's a digital selling, marketing, and servicing experience, but now there's a digital, contracting, rebates, right? Type of experience on the commercial side of the business, the middle office side of that business.
Yeah, I see a ton of opportunity there. Eddie?
Yeah, no, the only thing I was going to piggyback, it's a great point, Mike, is it's important for teams in this digital world, which we're not gonna take a step back. I see this continuing for a long time, is to take the risk out of the deliverability of content and what content's being shown. Bringing all of that into one central operating technology stack, Mike, to your point, is really, really important because it's the main hub that the rep's going to live and breathe in. And the automation and the AI behind it is, okay, I'm working an opportunity with this product at this stage. I don't have my manager in my ride along with me for today's meeting, but I log into CRM and it says, hey, you should be leveraging this content, or you should be leveraging this internal pricing sheet at this point in the sales cycle. So taking the risk when people are working at home, not in an office environment, is really, really important for the account planning piece of it. But also, are we delivering the right content, and is it marketing approved and legal approved content? So it's not going to get us sued in the long run. So all of that and taking the risk out of it is really, really important.
Yeah, and historically that required a lot of wherewithal on a sales rep's part. There's a lot of resident knowledge that goes into what are the right marketing materials, what are the right plays to run, who are the right people to get involved in this sale. Having crawled around in med device for the last 25 years, a few things are true. I call them, these are my truisms, and two of them very much speak to Mike and Eddie exactly what it is you're talking about. The first one is reps who plan their business more strategically sell more, period. Truism. Reps who understand how to access and utilize their resources sell more, period. That's Mike, your point. That's all digital. That's all digitally available by way of technology today for somebody to plan a territory more strategically than they had in the past, working with old bark and charcoals and Excel spreadsheets, as is their ability to access and utilize the resources made available inside of some of these massive organizations. I do an onboarding sales training class, and I'll ask, I'll come in, maybe it might be a 2 or 3 week class where there's a lot of clinical training, and then we're sort of the business acumen, selling skills on the back end. And I'll ask the group, how many different departments came in and spoke to the group over the course of this program? And they'll start, well, finance was here, accounting was here, marketing was here, engineering, R&D, compliance, regulatory, all these different resources. How many of them at some point in their presentation said, hey, we're here to help you. Please let us know how can we be of value to you in the field? And it's like, the answer is the same every time. Like they all did. They all offered their assistance in some way. But what percentage of the reps in that onboarding class are collecting business cards and writing down information and reaching out to those people specifically for content and recommendations after the program? And I know it's in the minority.
Yeah. And, Phil and Eddie, what we're talking about here is best practices, right? Like how do we implement and deploy what the company believes are best practices to the field, and the field can actually act on it, right? Yep. But
To your point earlier, to influence actual behavior in the field.
Right. But back to the topic of collaboration, the best practice today is potentially not going to be the best practice 6 months from now. So that collaboration is absolutely necessary. I get the benefit of working at a technology company. And at Salesforce, we collaborate constantly across multiple teams. So when we need to change our approach, when we need to change our selling style, when we need to change an account strategy, or when we need to approach an industry or sub-industry a little bit differently, that comes via collaboration, that comes via experience, and then sharing that back, right? And these new digital platforms enable that level of collaboration. So it's not even just down to the deal level and the account level, but it's down to the overall go-to-market level and giving everybody the tool to collaborate, to continue to enhance the business, change the business. If you kind of look back at, multiple people in the field doing their own thing, best practices are shared, maybe with a cohort of individuals, or maybe not shared into an annual sales kickoff or a QBR where everybody gets together to tell their tales of the road, right? But by incorporating and making, digital assets, digital technology part of the daily lives and the daily routine of everybody, we can also foster that level of collaboration and learn around what's working, what's not working, how do we change? Because that feedback, most of the time is going to come from the field anyway.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's fantastic, right? And you guys have started to head on a little bit on regards to those best practices. And as we kind of look to wrap things up, I'd love to understand from the medtech industry space what some of those best practices are going to be for them to be able to continue to stay ahead of the curve versus some of those other industries that are highly regulated today.
Well, I think you guys probably, Eddie and Mike, have more visibility to what's going on in other industries. I know you both heavily focused in medtech, but your companies sell outside of medtech where ours doesn't really. Certainly in working with you all in prep for this webinar and on other topics, we've gotten into some things that are new to me, things that aren't being adopted or talked about. One of them being just this notion of the enterprise rep. The enterprise rep in software has come to mean something different to me. It's not a transactional rep. It's a rep who has a skill set and an ability to navigate complex institutions using a commercial operating platform like you're all using today. Whereas, in working with a lot of the medical device companies, especially the bigger ones who are trying to leverage across divisions, where they've had success historically is very grassroots. It's because the spine rep, the ortho rep, and the neuro rep decided to meet for happy hour and talk about where they're selling, who they're selling to, and how they might collaborate. But again, very grassroots and individual driven as opposed to platform driven, which I think is largely the point here, that there's opportunity to adopt technology to do some of these things a little more effectively.
Yeah, I think, our organization, we work with most industries, any organization that has a B2B selling team and a B2B customer success team. And we leverage the same solution for all of those industries. I don't see a ton of difference from a financial services B2B company to a logistics B2B company to a high tech to a med tech organization, because there's four things that are really crucial for each and every single one of those industries. Number one, how do we guide our sellers around best practices and our methodology? Number two, how do we develop broader and deeper relationships across all of our accounts? Number three, how do we identify and how do we grow these particular accounts by leveraging our internal data set? And number four, how do we educate the marketplace at scale through content? So all of those things are very, very similar. And I will say the trend that we are starting to see across a lot of our customers and specific to industry is Mike hit on data. We're starting to see a lot of financial services companies become data companies and sell a technology platform tied to the data that they now have. We're seeing logistics companies who are selling into the large global enterprise that have route data, that have all types of data, deliverability data to help with supply chain, transitioning their business into selling a high tech platform. Mike, you've hit on it before, but a lot of med tech companies are collecting a lot of data. A lot of HLS companies are collecting data and pivoting into selling their software as a platform. So the processes and the methodology are going to change, but those four key pillars around best practices, driving deeper and broader relationships, finding and growing your customers and educating your customers and bringing that into one collaborative environment. It's very, very similar across all industries, in my opinion. Obviously, each niche has different ways that they go to market. But I see a lot of similarities to answer your question directly, Phil.
Yeah, you guys hit on a lot. The one other thing that we're seeing in the med tech space that is pulled from other industries is if you think about financial services, private banking, retail banking, credit union, it's all about the consumer 360, right? You think about any retail customer, it's about the consumer, right? Engaging with the consumer. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing. We work with health systems providers, we work with payers, with member services, we work with pharma, with patient services. And the trend that we're seeing in medtech is how do we get closer to the patient? How can we engage the patient? Patients have more access, more control in how they can communicate to their vendors or the products that they're using. So it's a desire for them. So enabling medtech companies with the tools to be able to create digital patient journeys, patient education, patient communication, and an access point, right? The concept of patient services in medtech it's more of a pharma term that we see in the pharmaceutical space, but it's becoming more and more of a practice within medtech organizations. So that's a big need, a big trend. Often conversation that we're having with our medtech organizations is, how do we deliver the tools and means to engage not just our people with our patients, but allow our patients to connect with other patients, to connect with our own organization, to access the data, the information, the engagement, the support that they need, because at the end of the day, they're making products to deliver superior outcomes to make people healthy, right? And if you can't communicate directly to the patient and control, that relationship, there's a gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this consumerism, this trend toward consumerism that you're talking about, Mike, also speaks to some of the mission stuff we were talking about earlier, where if the intent in the end is to improve patients' lives, there's a lot of data that would suggest that the more involved a patient is in their treatment, the better the outcome is going to be.
Absolutely.
Guys, well, awesome conversation here this afternoon. I think overall some really great key takeaways is really having teams being able to utilize technology, the data around that for teams to become a lot more effective in their process, and in turn, obviously provide a lot more collaboration just in turn to make those adjustments within the sales process and cycle. So thank you everyone for those that have joined. Thank you to our panelists, Phil, Mike, and Eddie. Really appreciate the opportunity. As I mentioned, again, we recorded this webinar and we will get this out to you all. And thank you so much for the time this afternoon.